fellow tea lovers. Settle in, because we've got a story. I'm Nell.
And I'm Rose. And today we're bringing you the tea.
Across eras. Before we jump into today's episode, take a minute to like and subscribe. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of what happened on March 16th, 1970, when a group of 46 women who worked for Newsweek magazine filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, stating they were discriminated against at their job because they were women.
I remember buying Newsweek in college and thinking I was the most adult thing that had ever adulted. Like, it used to occupy this really rarefied space. I'm not sure it really does anymore, but Newsweek was...
I remember reading like Newsweek and Time magazine at like doctors' offices all the time. I know the story is familiar to you because we watched the TV series called Good Girls Revolt together. And I looked up on IMDb. It says the show premiered in 2016, but we watched it as one of our like pandemic bubble shows, didn't we?
Yeah, somehow it had flown under both of our radar.
It is weird.
Very much in our wheelhouse for both of our interests, and it just sort of happened when it happened, I guess.
Also, I feel like we had a lot more free time to watch TV at the beginning of the pandemic.
I miss Tiger King pandemic.
Right. Those were the good old confusing days of staying home from work.
Mm-hmm.
So the TV show is based on a true story, which comes from the book The Good Girls Revolt, How the Women of Newsweek Sued Their Bosses and Changed the Workplace by Lynn Povich. One thing I noticed in reading the book, the TV show had a lot of these like fun, sexy scenes that were not in the book.
Well, of course, the TV show's going to have the fun, sexy scenes. That brings a third of your audience.
Do you remember that scene where they're like at some kind of weird sex nightclub?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, did I imagine this?
No.
All right. Right now, also, I am in a DEI class for my master's program, and I chose to review this book in my section, which was gender. So I've used the book as pretty much the sole source for this episode, and it's linked on our website if you want to check it out. The author describes this book as a transformative tale of women who were raised in the 1950s, found themselves in the revolutionary 1960s. She said she felt lucky to land a job at Newsweek magazine. At the time, it was renowned for its cutting-edge coverage of civil rights in the swinging 60s.
It really definitely represented a lot of just the massive shift away from post-war sentiments and into actual individuality.
Definitely. During the war, Newsweek was staffed by mostly women, but the war ended, men came back, and the women were like, peace out, we're going to go be homemakers.
Oh, it's a league of their own.
Whether they wanted to be or not. Exactly.
We don't need the ladies anymore. The guys are coming home.
Exactly. So Lynn Povich, author of the book, she began her career as a secretary in Newsweek's Paris bureau in 1965, right after graduating. And then she came back and started working at the New York branch near, I think it was November 1966. And at that time, the highest position in Newsweek that a woman could usually get was a researcher type position, and involved a lot of like fact checking, finding relevant quotes, interviewing people adjacent to the story, but like not that important.
The less fun legwork of reporting.
They even did a lot of general editing for the reports, but all the reporters were men. And some women said that they took the job at Newsweek or similar jobs because there were a lot of men working there, and great place to shop for a husband.
Yeah, same with universities. People made jokes about getting your MRS.
Yes. And if that is your cup of tea, that is awesome. That is what I support. Being able to do what you want to do.
But when people take a look at that box and say, well, those are the only parameters you have.
Yeah.
Live within that box. That's when it's a problem.
That's a problem, right? I'm a deeply feminist person, and I think women should have the choice. Do you want to stay home and get married? That's really cool. Do you want to get married and work? Cool. Do you want to get married and work and have kids? Awesome. Do you want to get married and work and not have kids? Awesome. Do you want to not get married and have kids? Hey, that's me. Awesome. Like, it doesn't matter. If you have the opportunity, that's great. I love that. But then, at this time, they didn't really have the opportunity.
The choice pool is a lot smaller.
And look, I don't think any of those options are better or worse than any of the other ones. But for the women of Newsweek who wanted career choices, it wasn't happening. There were other publications that were hiring women as writers or reporters, but Newsweek had the prestige, which I gotta be honest, like, I'm on Newsweek.
At this moment in time, that cachet is gone. I'm just going to say, I'm sorry, Newsweek. I apologize if anybody's offended by this. It's not the rigorous journalism that it was. It does not have the same
Clout.
Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And it's not even just that we've moved away from print media. Their web media is a shit show.
So here's a fun quote from the book that kind of summarizes everything. At Newsweek, only girls with college degrees, and we were called girls then, were hired to sort and deliver mail, humbly pushing our carts from door to door in our ladylike frocks and proper high-heeled shoes. If we could manage that, then we might graduate to clippers, another female ghetto. Dressed in drab khaki smocks so that the ink wouldn't smudge our clothes, we sat at the clip desk, marked up newspapers, tore out relevant articles with razor-edged ripsticks, and routed the clips to the appropriate departments.
You're still only qualified to do the menial jobs if you are at the very highest level of the thing that we don't actually believe is worthwhile.
Yes. And just as like an FYI, I ended up looking up the word ghetto to see what it was used as in this context. Because I don't think, like, nowadays I feel like when you say ghetto, it's got a little bit of like maybe a classist or even racist connotation.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Oxford Dictionary says ghetto is an isolated or segregated group or area. So I suppose that was like the women's side of the building.
What they're talking about.
Yeah.
You've been separated out into your perceived class.
Exactly. So you had to have a degree and high heels to push a mail cart.
I can't believe the high heel thing is still a problem today. You still hear that today. Well, I'm required to wear heels by my job. I'm sorry.
When I worked in the office, my boss, who is lovely, if you're listening to this, I love you, no shade, but constantly she's like, don't you want to date? Why don't you wear a little makeup? It's just not my thing.
At the terrible job where we met, our boss at the time makes this offhanded comment that, oh, you need to shave your armpits. I was like, why? I'm growing them. I didn't have any particular feelings one way or the other about it, but when she looked down her nose at me and said, you need to shave your armpits, it looks disgusting. We then had a months-long private contest about how long that armpit hair could really get. I do shave more often than that, but it's just sort of like, oh, you want to see big? You think I should shave? I am going to have gigantic pit beards. What are you going to do to stop me?
Isn't it weird in retrospect how many things about that job where we were like cool, forward liberals was completely inappropriate?
Absolutely. It was couched in all of the mistakes that we said that we were actively working against.
Yes. Because her, of all people, her whole like vibe is very hippie.
It was very countercultural. It was like she wanted the cool parts of being counterculture. And that's, I think, where you see the mistake a lot is that people see the results of countercultural living and say, oh, I want that. And there's a lot more involved there.
I know. We've been gone from there like a while. Like, I think I've been gone from there 8 years almost.
Yeah. Just about 10.
Yeah. So I know a lot has changed in a short amount of time. I can't believe the way we acted.
I think that's true of pretty much anybody looking back at their 20s.
True.
There's a little bit of a...
I mean, I was in my
30s. We lived as though we were 21.
It's true. But, I don't know, just the way we talked about things and, like, policed each other's body hair.
Mm-hmm.
Weird. Yeah. Weird. Anyways, so... back to the Revolt. In the 1950s, women who worked full-time earned an average of 59 to 64 cents for every dollar a man in the same job earned. In fields and jobs similar to Newsweek, there were a lot of educated women, and they were still hired for mostly menial jobs, but some of them did a little bit better than Newsweek.
Well, the pay disparity was a lot more codified at that point. You hear the 70 cents on the dollar figure now, and it's sort of presented as an arbitrary fact-like thing.
Right.
It was absolutely codified. There's my mom always loved telling the story of my grandmother was a landscape architect. She worked for a very large firm right out of college, and she signed everything and put her official name as everything as her first initial and then her last name.
Genius.
Because her boss had never met her, assumed she was a man, and paid her accordingly.
There's literally a similar storyline to that in season 2 of The Gilded Age. The architect of this bridge is like a man in name.
Mm-hmm.
And so when, the powers that be start finding out it's a woman, they're horrified. But some of them also realize she can do this.
She's been doing it.
It's wild.
I had the really great fortune to meet Lily Ledbetter when I was in college. And for those of you that don't know, her lawsuit against her employer, she essentially had lost out on years and years and years of wages. She was being paid lower than the men in the positions around her.
Of course.
But because of the laws at that time, and I'm saying at that time, this is around the same, like 2009. Around that time, yeah. But around that time, you could only apply to get back wages. Like if you won a lawsuit proving that your employer had paid you with a disparity, you could only ask for it back to a certain dated point. And so your employer could steal as much as they liked from you as long as they could lie very well about it. And if they managed to hide it for long enough, you would never get that equity back. And so the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which is actually the very first piece of legislation that Obama signed into law in his first term, that took away that requirement.
Good.
That you could only go back to a certain point. It is now enshrined in law that you had to be paid back everything that you had lost if you could prove that you had lost it. And that's actually the origin of why it is not illegal to ask your coworkers what they make.
Right.
You thank Lily Ledbetter for that.
If you live in the US of A and your boss says we don't talk about our pay, that just means that either you or someone next to you is being paid a lot less than everyone else.
Well, the point is that kind of scrutiny, while uncomfortable, is so necessary to make sure that these repeating problems do not continue to repeat. She gave a speech and she was talking about all the interviews that they were doing during the process of her lawsuit, and then when the act was being put forward. Every single interviewer asked her to bake a cake. They all came to her house and wanted to take pictures of this woman that was fighting an employment fight in her kitchen, being a mother, baking a cake. And she told them universally every time, I do not bake. Do you want some coffee?
Did they think that would make her appear more sympathetic in the year of 2000 and something?
Because you're personable if you're a nurturer, if you don't have a dick.
I'm going to set everything on fire. So, in 1963, the Equal Pay Act was passed, and it stated that it's illegal to pay women a lower rate for the same job. But here in the last stats I could find, 2022, women make an average of 82 cents for each dollar a man makes in the same job.
That's improved.
Right, it is. So it's still illegal, but that just means you can't advertise it.
Yeah, that does not preclude people hiding things.
Of course not. So some of the men quoted in Lynn's book had some interesting, and I mean that in the sarcastic and non-sarcastic kind of way, things to say. So there was a reporter, Harry Waters. Once he wrote a Newsweek article, obviously this was much more recently, titled Beyond Beavis and Butthead. Like, that's not relevant at all, but I thought it was funny.
That's just great.
Right. But he's quoted in the book saying that in the early days of his career, he thought that discrimination was a gender issue, just like women are paid less. Obviously, that's the way it is. He didn't think of it as an injustice. Of course he didn't.
That's just sort of the way things are.
Yeah. Because he also said he always knew, and he was told, that he would get a shot at reporting, writing, and editing. And he knew that it wasn't for an option for the women there. That just wasn't a career track for them.
Yeah, the stepping stones only exist if you have that kind of relationship with your boss, and you're just never going to if you have those touch points of commonality.
And there were some women in various forms of power, but they weren't, they weren't the writers, they weren't the journalists, they weren't the reporters that some of these women wanted to be.
Well, the prestige jobs, going for the prestige jobs gets sold as selfish, I think, a lot of times. Well, why do you need to be the byline? Why can't you just be a contributor?
Exactly. And a lot of these women who were in power were like rich owners. So I don't know what that says, but it says
too socially large to be ignored.
Yeah. So before I get into the lawsuit, here's another fun quote from the book. There came into existence an institution unknown to newspapers, the checker. The checker is usually a girl in her 20s, usually from some Eastern college, pleasant looking, but not femme fatale. She came from college unqualified for anything but looking for an interesting job. After a few years, she usually feels, bitterly and rightly, that nobody appreciates her work. The beginning of the week is lackadaisical, and so is the research. But towards the end, when the typewriters clack behind closed doors and editors snap at intruders, there are midnight hamburgers and tears in the ladies' room, for the checker gets no credit if the story is right, but she gets the blame if it is wrong. So what seems to have been the main catalyst for this lawsuit was that in very early 1970, the Newsweek editors decided that the new women's liberation movement deserved a cover story. They're like, yeah, we gotta slap this on our cover. But they thought they had this huge problem. They had no women to write the story.
All of a sudden you've noticed.
Yeah, forget they have all these talented women helping them with their stories, but they don't have the title of a reporter. Except they kind of did. Because in March of 1969, about a year before this, the author of this book, Lynn, had been promoted to junior writer. But that's not going to stop Newsweek.
Who can write a cover story, the lady?
Exactly. That doesn't stop them. They're like, yeah, that's not a problem. I'm going to read to you the opening lines of the article that hit stands. Don't pull your hair out, okay? It's going to be even worse when I tell you what the magazine cover looked like. Here's the opening. In an age of social protest, the old cause of U.S. feminism has flared into a new angry life in the women's liberation movement. It is a phenomenon difficult to cover. Most of the feminists won't even talk to male journalists who are hard put in turn to tell the story with the kind of insight a woman could bring to it. So for this week's coverage, Newsweek sought out Helen Didar, a top-flight journalist who is also a woman.
Had to hire from the outside because this creature is so rare and mythical, the woman who does the thing you'd like her to do. Good Lord.
So, this article comes in a magazine. The cover is bright yellow. It's got a picture of a woman. The woman she kind of looks like those pictures you see on like a video or a camera where they do like your heat sensor. Infrared, that's the word, thank you. So the woman in the picture is like red and white and purple. And if you look at it for longer than a second, you'll see that she's naked. Of course she's naked.
There's no words. Because how could you possibly distill femininity down into anything but your breasts?
Yeah.
It's maddening.
Right. Provided you can't really see her breasts, but you notice it in her stomach and like her cute little belly button. And the title alongside this picture, because the woman in the picture's got like one fist up in the air and she's surrounded by, I don't know what it's called, that circle with the plus on it that means...
Oh, the female symbol.
Yes, and it's broken.
I think that's the only part I actually agree with, shattering the convention.
Right? And the title next to this naked woman picture says, Woman in Revolt.
First of all, it's not news. Second of all...
It was news in the way that they were like covering, wow, these liberated women are taking back their sexuality, which they probably thought they were so clever. Oh, she's taking back her sexuality, so let's put a naked woman on the cover. Genius!
That always seems to be the point.
Cigars all around.
Aren't you sex positive? That means it's for me, right? And those two are not related.
Girl, we're going to do an episode where I tell you everything I've learned from the Girls Next Level podcast. Shout out Holly and Bridget. Because that was Hugh Hefner. He was like, but I'm so sex positive. Right. I'm liberating you.
No, you're making something that you wanted with the building blocks of something that they wanted. And for some reason, you think that makes you equal.
No, it didn't. It doesn't. It never will. Back to the opening of the article, it reminds me of a quote from one of the most loved and hated singers of our time. She said, "There's a different vocabulary for men and women. A man does something, it's strategic. A woman does the same thing, it's calculated. A man is allowed to react. A woman can only overreact." This opening of the Newsweek article is basically saying women cannot be reasonably outraged. They have to flare into anger. And yes, that is a quote from Taylor Swift.
Flare can mean a lot of things in a lot of contexts. It's really a product of a slow burn in this case.
Yeah, 100%. So the day that magazine hit the newsstands, 46 women at Newsweek filed their complaint. The person who represented these women was so cool. She was the assistant legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, and her name was Eleanor Holmes Norton. We could go on about her for ages. Might have to save her for
Could be
the
her own
future.
episode.
Yeah, she was really cool. She was born in 1937. She was Yale educated. She was very well known for defending the First Amendment. She later served in the House of Representatives. So one of her famous quotes, because like I said, she was really famous for defending the First Amendment. She says, "You seldom get to defend the First Amendment by defending people you like. You don't know whether the First Amendment is alive and well until it is tested by people with despicable ideas. And I love the idea of looking a racist in the face, remembering this was a time when racism was more alive and well than it is today, and saying, 'I'm your lawyer, sir. What are you going to do about that?'" So, one of the most wild, mind-blowing cases to me that she took on is she defended former Alabama governor and known pandering racist George Wallace.
Wow, I had no idea.
Me neither.
Just that's commitment.
Yes,
I'm not sure I can handle that level.
George Wallace was like the governor for 4 terms, and I think in the middle of that his wife ran because he couldn't run like 3 consecutive times, and she was like, "Yeah, but he's the governor, but I'm the governor." But he's the guy who's known for saying, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever."
Yeah, he's responsible for a lot of it.
Yes, he is the guy who blocked the doors on June 11th, 1962 at the University of Alabama to try to defy President Kennedy's federal order of desegregation. Like, that's him. And she defended him because she believed that he had the right to his atrocious beliefs.
That is wild. That is some fortitude.
Right. And in defending him, Eleanor was like, "Oh, it's nothing but an old-fashioned First Amendment case." She's way cooler than I am because the idea of defending someone like that makes me
I don't think
ill.
the anger would make thinking possible.
Right. So, okay, as you know, I went to high school and part of college in Alabama. I lived in this tiny little town called Slapout, and I was in the 8th grade when we moved there. And I think it was this same year when I was still in the 8th grade, we went to the Montgomery Zoo. Montgomery is the capital of Alabama, and we lived maybe, I don't know, like 40 minutes north of it. And when you live in a small town, like driving 40 minutes to do anything is very normal.
We had 2 hours. Costco runs on the weekends.
Yeah. We went to the Montgomery Zoo one day, and I wouldn't have noticed this except my mom pointed out to us there was like this super old guy in a wheelchair. You know, I wouldn't have noticed. I was like a young teenager. I was not interested in other people. But after my mom pointed him out, and then later I realized that this is why she did, he just seemed like really interested and like happy to watch me and my siblings like having a good time at the zoo. I'm not.
It's a little bit organically creepy, but
Yeah, a little, yeah. I don't know. But because like when I see little kids playing and they're just cute and happy, I'm like, "Aw."
that's fun to see.
Yeah, it is. So maybe it was that. The only thing I remember, like I said, is he was old AF and his wheelchair is being pushed by a black man. Turns out it was old George Wallace. Right. So if my math is correct, he would have been like around 74 that time, which isn't that old. But like in my memory, he was like way ancient.
Well, as a kid, you know,
Exactly.
I mean, he's probably a mummy to a 7-year-old.
Exactly. So it was a few years later that I learned more about who George Wallace was and how terrible he was. Might have even been college when I learned that. Yeah, that whole experience, looking back on it, is just like darkly ironic.
Yeah.
And he was one of those people who would be like, "But I have black friends, I'm not racist. Like, I just say these things and maybe believe them because it gets me elected."
Yeah, and then it becomes policy, and then that is a
Exactly.
huge problem.
He is a trash bag. So, back to Newsweek and the lawsuit. Most of the executives there, and they call the executives the Wallendas. I don't.
The trapeze artists, the Flying Wallendas, are an extremely famous circus family, and so being a Wallenda means that you can fly and grab and hold yourself up and not fall in a very precarious set of situations.
That makes so much more sense. So these Walendas, they're like, what? Why would you do this to us? Here's some of my favorite quotes. Let's just fire them all.
Yeah, that'll fix it.
But you're such a nice girl. Why didn't you tell us? Side note, they had.
Why didn't you? Well, we would have fixed the problem if you had just let us know.
These lowly employees are soiling the magazine's reputation.
No, you did that on your own 50 years later. Sorry, guys.
But you're a respectable woman. It's natural that women are in servile roles. And then my favorite. But single women don't need as much pay as a family man.
Perhaps they'd like to grow their lives like any other human.
Illegal. Not allowed. Support was obviously super spare at first. A ton of stuff happened, and it took a really long time. But they were going to have a memorandum of understanding established. Those negotiations began about a month after the lawsuit, and it was signed on August 26th, which happened to be the 50th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And only a few weeks later, cracks were showing. Nothing was changing. The promises were lip service. They were ignored immediately. The heads of Newsweek would be like, oh man, but we're like so super busy being flying trapeze artists that we can't enforce this memorandum of understanding. Are you crazy? No.
You got it on paper. What more do you want?
Right? Like we said, we're going to be nice. You mentioned this earlier, sort of, and this quote from the book I feel like sums up one of the biggest issues. We don't raise our daughters to be as ambitious as our sons. One reason was that success and likability are positively correlated for men, but negatively correlated for women. As a man gets more powerful and successful, he is better liked. As a woman gets more powerful and successful, she is less liked.
And we do it today to varying degrees.
Right.
We are meant to be nurturers. Women are more positively perceived in a nurturing role than anything else.
And that's going to come up again in a few minutes. And I know I already said this in our Clara Bow episode, but it just makes me think of the Taylor Swift song, The Man. She's like, if I was a man, all of this would be cool. Nobody would question me or tell me, did you deserve that?
It's such an additional set of hurdles.
It is.
It's already hard to achieve, but when you have to prove that you deserved to achieve, it's that much harder.
So, by 1972, the women sued them again because nothing had changed. Nothing.
You've had the opportunity. Now let's see some results.
Right. This lady named Catherine Graham, she was the owner of the Washington Post Company, and that company owned Newsweek, was friends with Gloria Steinem. And Gloria...
Lady of Legend.
Yes. Famed writer, journalist, political activist, feminist. So Catherine is friends with Gloria, and Catherine's like, Gloria's kind of onto something. And Catherine orders her corporate lawyer, Joseph Califano, I think is how you say his last name. Side note, he later became Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under President Carter. Yeah, she orders him to settle it. She's like, fix this. So goals were set. They set timetables with their goals. So by the end of 1975, 1/3 of all the reporters and writers were to be women. 1/3 of all the researchers would be men. They could do that job also. And there would have to be a woman senior editor.
And people point to those rules, long after the fact. Well, we just have to meet our quota. This is an affirmative action hire. This is, you see that so many times.
Yep.
But when you look at the run up to this, where, why couldn't we just, trust people to do the right thing? Well, this is why.
Nobody does
the
right thing.
Completely codified, even when it's in writing that they have promised to do the right thing, unless it is actually legally enforceable, they will not. Humans are mean creatures.
Yep. So that was in 1972 with the goal of that happening in 75. And in 1975, author of this book, Lynn Povich, was named Newsweek's first woman senior editor.
You are damn right.
Right, that part's awesome. However,
there's always however.
Here's a quote from Lynn. When I returned to New York, Ed proudly told me that he was raising my salary from $27,000 to $32,000. Then I found out that Charlie Michener, another writer who'd been promoted to senior editor in the arts section, would be making $40,000 a year. I couldn't believe it.
Still playing the same trick.
Yeah. Consciousness finally raised, I confronted Ed. He explained that my percentage raise was much higher than Charlie's, but that only meant that I was making much less to begin with. But since Ed had already announced my promotion, I had him cornered, and I told him I would not take the senior editor job unless I got the same amount as a man doing the same work.
You can't fulfill your lawsuit if
Boom.
you don't actually toe this
Boom.
line. Good for her.
So Ed reluctantly agrees, and Lynn felt great. However, when Lynn called her parents to tell them the good news, her father was thrilled and cheered her on. Her mother's response was, "Now you'll never have children."
That career just got that much too successful, and she's not worth taking off the shelf anymore.
Unfortunately, it wasn't until 1986 that senior editor Dominique Browning was promoted to the assistant managing editor, becoming the first female Wallinda. By 2007, so here we are, much more recent, the women employed at Newsweek were feeling a lot like the women who were there in 1970. Journalist Jessica Bennett was given an internship with Newsweek in 2006 and, quote, was about to be hired when 3 guys showed up for summer internships. So here's what happened. At the end of the summer, the men were offered jobs, but Jessica wasn't, even though she was given one of their stories to rewrite. And despite the fact that she was writing 3 times a week on Newsweek's website, her internship just kept getting extended. So finally, in January of 2007, they hired her full-time, but she was in a constant battle to get her articles published. So before they were publishing them, but now you're promoted.
Now that we have to
not
pay
going
you,
to do it.
Suddenly your work level is far less satisfactory.
So Jessica was feeling like she had to battle to get her articles published, while the guys with the same or less experience were getting better assignments and faster promotions. Jessica says, "Initially, I did not identify it as a gender issue. Several of us women had been feeling like we weren't doing a good job or accomplishing things. We didn't feel like we were being heard." So she's like, "I'm really good and qualified, but the expectations have been laid on me that these slacking losers over here are actually doing better than I am." No. She's got a best friend who also works at Newsweek. Jessica's best friend is Jessie Ellison. And Jessie gets really angry when she gets a promotion and then finds out that the guy hired to fill her previous position was being paid way more than she made in that position.
The only thing that they learned was how to hide it.
Exactly. So Jessie, bless her, is quoted as saying, "That summer, 6 college-aged dudes had come in as summer interns, and suddenly the department was a frat house. Guys were high-fiving, turning the TV from CNN to ESPN, constantly invading my cubicle, and asking me, as if I was their mother, whether or not they should microwave their lunches." So once again, women are supposed to be nurturing.
If you're the caregiver that goes, "Oh, sweetheart, let me show you how to use that microwave in 2007, you're the popular girl.
My family got their first microwave in the 80s, so, you should know by 2007 how to use one. So, while she's having to pitch all of her ideas, the frat boys are getting assigned stories. And she has a new boss that's taken over, and she didn't know what to do. She felt like she'd been demoted. She goes and talks to a senior editor who she felt like had been a mentor to her. And he goes, "Oh, the problem is just that you're so pretty. You need to figure out a way to use your sexuality to your advantage."
That is some terrible advice.
Girl. And she's like, even though I definitely thought he was an idiot for saying that, because he had fought hard for her in her role, she was like, hearing this changed my perception of the previous 6 months. She was suddenly like, "Wait, were you advocating for me because you thought I was pretty?
Were you borderline stopping yourself from hitting on me?"
Yes. And more importantly, is this what other people in the office think? I'm not talented, I'm pretty? And Jessie said that it really screwed with her head.
Well, I mean, how could it not?
Exactly.
When you suddenly realize exactly what people think you're worth.
Yeah. So then a video producer for Newsweek, Jen Molina, was talking about, the magazine and the issues that they felt like they were facing with a veteran researcher, Tony Skaggs. And Tony was like, "Sounds like exactly what happened in 1970 with this lawsuit." And Jen was like, "Lawsuit?
What lawsuit?
Question mark. And she tells Jessie and Jessica about it. And they're like, "Google exists. How do we not know about this?" And it was actually at the time hard to find any information about it.
Mm.
So it wasn't until October of 2009 that the women discovered the details of the lawsuit. And with that knowledge, they went to their editor and they're like, hey, we want to write a piece on women in the current workplace because this happened and now it's improved.
It's a piece of Newsweek history. I mean, that's a good
Exactly. That was in October. In January of 2010, they finally got some comments back from the editors on their article. Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a weekly publication.
Mm-hmm.
They don't take months. In February, after hearing nothing about their revisions, they started pinning copies of the Women in Revolt cover to their desks.
I love it.
So in early March, the editor, like the big editor of Newsweek, was like, I have to recuse myself from overseeing this. So basically, he was like silently killing it. It took a lot of pressure and persuasion. And they literally dedicated like the next 3 weeks of their life to this. But they got a 4-page article titled, Are We There Yet? In the March 22, 2010 issue. So things have improved. Nobody is expecting you to get a college degree and wear high heels to push a mail cart. Here's the thing. Women still have to face so many things men never have to. We are still paid less in general. We are still expected to be motherly and family oriented, even to these rando dudes in the office. A powerful woman is rarely liked. We can't be out late, drink too much, flirt, or even just kind of like live and breathe without asking for it. Our bodies are still policed and subjected to controlling laws. Oh my gosh. So, in closing, I'm going to say this. This whole topic, it can be uncomfortable, and I get that. There are things that make me feel uncomfortable when I hear them, and I think, well, but I'm not like that. Right? Like the not all men argument. Yeah, I'm not like that. But here's the thing. I think that's normal. But how else are we going to change it? Like make worldwide, generational, cultural change if we aren't willing to be like, but I'm not like that. Okay, but maybe some people are. Like,
let's still work on it as though we were involved. Yes. We don't feel that we're involved. How do we move forward with that culpability?
And how do I, for example, a person who's like, but I'm not like that, how do I change that in other people? How do I become a good ally? How else are we going to tell Grandpa to learn how to iron his own shirt when Grandma finally leaves him? Fellow tea lovers, before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.